Okay, this video digs in much deeper into the XML fundamentals and will be things that you'll need to know about really for this week, but also for the rest of the class, because a lot of the stuff we'll learn in this video are things that in order to do XML or any of the other XML implementations, XSLT, XPath, many of them follow these rules. So let's look at what we might consider the building block of XML, which is an element. An element has a opening tag, a closing tag, and a value inside. And the element we use almost in every single document that we'll create. And they're pretty straightforward, but anyways, it's something you should know about. Every element has an opening tag and a closing tag. You can also have an empty element, so this would be empty, and that's legal in XML. The other thing you can do is have an empty tag and have a self-closing tag like that. And again, people who have done HTML know what self-closing tags are. That's when you have like a break and you do it something like that. Well, same goes for an empty element tag. You could do it that way. And you'll sometimes see elements that have attributes inside them but no value for the element. They'll do them that way. But in general, if it's empty, it's fine just to do that. You don't need to do a self-closing tag. Just have it be empty like that. No punctuation is allowed in your tag names. So this is, for example, something that you wouldn't want to do. Put an exclamation mark, colons, things like that. Some of them are allowed but discouraged heavily, and other ones are just illegal right out of the gate, and you'll find that out as time goes on. But anyways, the idea is that all these, like say colons, hyphens, periods, sort of punctuation type things, as you can see we're using here a forward slash. Those are typically used in the XML language itself to do certain functions or activities to the document, and sometimes they're commands that the XML parser uses to do certain things. So they're kind of like reserved characters. Don't use them in your tag names. It's just a bad idea in general. Colons, those are used when we learn about namespaces. We'll start using colons again. Not to drive the point home too hard here, but just don't use that. Just stick with normal words. That'll work fine. Case matters. We mentioned this in the other video, that if I do something like this and then I have something like this, 6'1" and the height, and I have an opening tag capital H and a closing tag lowercase h, those do not match, and thus it's not legal XML. So in order to have legal XML, they have to be matching like that. Not only does case matter, but it's good to pick a convention and stick with it. Basically an XML tag creating convention. So one of the ones I like to use is, say I have my name here and I want to put a tag on it, an element. So I do something like this and put an underscore there, and it does an auto suggest, which is I like a lot. And there, I've created an element, and it's not only verbose, but you can also see I have kind of a convention. And once you pick a convention, so you're doing, for example, compound words in an element name, just stick with it. If you're going to use an underscore to split up a compound word, stick with it. This is one that I prefer. I'm not going to grade you either way on it, but I really find that it's just, having done this now for whatever 10-15 years, I just find that this is an easy one to read. You will occasionally see people do what's called camel case, conventions, and that's fine. I'm not real nuts about it. For XML, it's usually used in other types of programming. In fact, we'll use it when we get into XML schema. Another one might be to have everything in uppercase. I'm not so nuts about uppercase. Again, if you use it, that's fine. I think one of the readings, maybe it's the Herald reading, he uses all uppercase. I find that uppercase in general seems like stuff is shouting at you, and it's just, not that the code is shouting at me, but it just makes it hard to read. So again, lowercase, and I usually use spaces in between. Don't start out a space with anything. You really always want to start with a letter. Don't start with a number or anything funny. You want really just plain human readable English, and use underscores to space things out if you need to. Let's talk about another concept in XML, which is well-formatness or well-formed XML. All these things we've discussed, closing tags. We haven't mentioned really a root element other than just in passing, but we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Matching tags, not using any kind of illegal characters in a tag name. This is all part of being a well-formed XML. This is something that if the XML is not well-formed, your parser can't read it, and will hopefully give you an error. It may not. It just might not read it. But well-formed, you have to have well-formed XML before you can even get into the realm of creating valid XML, which we'll do once we do DTDs or XML schema. Well-formedness and validation are two separate things. They're often kind of lumped together, but they're not. Well-formed or well-formedness, another word would be legal XML. Those are all three words basically have to do that you're following the rules of XML markup. Again, just to reiterate, if you have a well-formed document, it means that you follow the rules of writing good XML. You want to make your structure explicit, and this comes out in one of the readings, and actually it's one of the reasons I assigned this reading, is that it spends a lot of time on how to make structure explicit. And this is where you go from XML as like a technology or science and start sort of messing around with it from the angle of being XML as an art or an art form. So let's look at one example here I'll take from our notes. Here we have one of my favorite musicians, Neil Young, and we have his name. Okay, that's fine. That's somewhat verbose in an element. And then we have Neil Percival Young. This is not very explicit in my opinion. One way we could do to make this explicit or to sort of chunk out a little bit of the data would be to create something like this, and we can just go through and basically itemize or tag out his entire name to something like this. And here we have his first name, middle name, last name, and it's much more clear on which name belongs to which. Okay, now we've been very explicit about our data, and now we want to actually do something that's called nesting. And XML really excels at this. Nesting is what it allows you to take a document, like a narrative type document, human written document, and show structure in it. And that's something that databases do not do very well. So let's get rid of that and just show what we're talking about here. So actually, let's just go back to what we had. And if we wanted to show more structure to this, we could do something like this, and basically encase all this data or nest it in a name tag. Let's see if it lets me do pretty print, and it does. Now we have name, so this is all going to be name data in there. And right away we have some hierarchy. So this is a parent We have children here. And this is where you can get into one of the sort of features of XML is that you can infer information from its parent tag. So this is a little bit redundant. We have name and then we have name here. One of the things we can do, we might not necessarily want to do this all the time, but this is just an example of how we can do it, is take first, we're in the name tag, if you will, or name element, so we know that anything that takes place in here is going to have to do with name on some level, so why not just shorten it to first? We're in name, let's get the first name, and then same way with middle, last, and then we have first, middle, and last. It's all taking place in name. So this is a good example of nesting, or a way to show hierarchy. You have a parent, and then you have a child node. These are all siblings again. They're all on the same level. You must have your tags properly nested. So, for example, if I were to accidentally close out name here, for whatever reason, closing tag, and I decide to close out last here, that's not legal. You will get an error if you do that, because you've closed out name here before last was closed out. So you essentially have your tags turned around here. So you want to have them nested properly and closed out properly. As I've mentioned a couple times, we want to use verbose markup. So again, we want to really, refrain from having like abbreviations. For example, just having N for name. XML, the parser will allow you to do that, but I will definitely start to squawk a little if I see that. This is really what XML is all about, is verbose markup, and we want it as human readable as possible. And you want clear and concise tags. You don't want to use abbreviations, but you also don't want to get into having really long names. I mean, we want to be reasonable here. You want to have something that's not abbreviation, but something that's just a human word that, again, if it's first name or name and then first, this is what XML is really good at, and so verbosity or verbose is really what we want to excel for, or aim for, and we don't want to use terse markup. I don't know if there's tersity, if that's a word, but let's stay away from terse markup. White space, let's talk about white space for a little bit. In XML we have something called parse character data, or PC data, and basically what parse character data means is that the parser, which is in your browser or in a browser, is what the browser is actually reading. It's parsing it. So when you have